In the bleak winter of 1798, the frontier of Appalachia carried whispers of something too dreadful to name. Families traveled westward, chasing the promise of fertile soil and a new beginning, yet along the twisting ridges and shadowed valleys of the wilderness path, countless wagons vanished without explanation. Some blamed hostile raids, others spoke of accidents, but the earth itself seemed to be swallowing whole households. It was here, in a corner of the mountains, later known as Raven Hollow, that a 12-year-old girl named Eliza Wren stepped unwillingly into history. Her story, pieced together from fragments of a diary and scattered court records, remains one of the most unsettling accounts ever tied to America's early frontier. Eliza had been born in Virginia, the youngest of three, but by the time her family's wagon reached Tennessee's rugged border, she was an orphan. Fever claimed her parents, leaving her adrift with distant cousins, the Porter family, who carried her more out of obligation than love. To them she was an extra mouth to feed during a hard journey, a fragile child whose future was somebody else's problem. Yet Eliza was no ordinary girl. She carried auburn hair that gleamed like fire in lantern light, and eyes of a piercing gray, sharp with curiosity. She could read and write, rare talents taught by her mother before illness stole her away. Those abilities should have safeguarded her future. Instead, they would entangle her in a web of deception darker than any she could imagine. By autumn of 1797, the Porter's wagon crawled through Raven Hollow, a place of jagged cliffs, ancient oaks, and silence so deep it seemed unnatural. Travelers spoke of this stretch in hushed tones. Wolves prowled the ridges, and the trail itself wound like a serpent through gorges where even sunlight hesitated. The Porters were anxious to move quickly, yet fortune or fate brought them into the path of a stranger who appeared like Providence. He called himself Nathaniel Cross, a young man of 19 with a striking presence. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed far better than most drifters, he carried himself with an educated air. His words flowed smoothly, touched with the polish of someone who had once lived among cities. He claimed to be a seasoned guide who had already led families safely through the most treacherous sections of the frontier. Around the fire that first night, he spoke warmly of safe routes, plentiful game, and hidden springs known only to him. To the weary Porters, Nathaniel appeared heaven-sent, but Eliza felt his gaze long before she felt his charm. During supper, while the others argued about supplies, Nathaniel's eyes lingered on her with an intensity that stirred unease. At 12, she was still a child, but childhood on the frontier often ended abruptly. She noticed the way he asked her questions apart from the adults, the way he seemed fascinated by her ability to read aloud from her journal. His compliments sounded gentle, but behind them simmered something she could not yet name. In the pages of that journal later, found stained with blood, Eliza described the encounter. "He tells me I am different," she wrote, "that my learning makes me precious, that most girls are but shadows while I am a flame. His words frighten me, yet they make me feel seen, as though I matter to someone again." To a child grieving her parents and dismissed by her guardians, Nathaniel's attention became a dangerous comfort. As the days passed, Nathaniel's place among the Porters grew secure. He walked confidently at the head of their caravan, pointing out landmarks with the assurance of long practice. When storms gathered, he knew where to shelter. When the path splintered into multiple trails, he argued convincingly for the safer choice. To the Porters, he was indispensable. To Eliza, he became something else, an anchor in a world that had cast her adrift. Yet beneath his polished words lay truths darker than any frontier legend. Nathaniel had indeed traveled these trails for years, but not as a guardian. He was a predator refining his art. The families he claimed had perished in raids were his own victims. their possessions funding his carefully concealed life. He sought not just money but control, and when he looked upon Eliza, he saw more than a companion. He saw a tool, a girl intelligent enough to keep records, vulnerable enough to control, and young enough to mold into his design. God, it was on a cold October night that he moved beyond suggestion. Eliza sat apart from the others, writing in her journal when Nathaniel approached. He spoke softly, painting visions of a life they might share traveling together as partners, guiding settlers to new lands, her intelligence supporting his strength. He told her that the Porters planned to leave her at a mission in Lexington, where stern matrons would break her spirit and bind her into the life of a submissive wife. With him, he promised, she would be free, respected, and cherished. He admitted her youth, but on the frontier, he argued, youth did not matter. What mattered was courage, and she had more than most dot to a grieving child hungry for belonging. The vision was irresistible. Within 3 days, in a crude ceremony performed by a traveling preacher, Eliza Wren became Eliza Cross, bride to a man nearly twice her age. The Porters, eager to be rid of responsibility, approved readily, even offering supplies as a gift. They believed they had secured her future. In truth, they had delivered her into the hands of a murderer. The winter that followed seemed, at first, like a dream. Nathaniel built a sturdy cabin in a secluded valley, hidden deep among towering trees and rocky cliffs. He praised Eliza's neat handwriting as she recorded weather, trail conditions, and maps. He read to her by firelight, quoting Shakespeare and Scripture in equal measure. When her belly began to swell with pregnancy, he appeared tender, preparing, teased to soothe her sickness, and speaking gently of the child they would raise. In her diary she wrote, "I believe myself the most fortunate wife in the wilderness. The Lord has sent me a husband of wisdom and strength. My sorrow is over." But as winter turned to spring, shadows crept into her paradise. Nathaniel vanished. For days on scouting trips, always returning with goods he could not clearly explain. A silver pocket watch here, a bolt of fine cloth their items, too rich for the wilderness. His excuses were vague. Trade with a passing merchant, a gift from a grateful chief. Eliza wanted to believe, but unease began to gnaw at her faith. That unease deepened in April, when the first family arrived at their cabin. The Harmons, weary travelers from North Carolina, sought safe passage to fertile land near Lexington. Nathaniel welcomed them with charm, but Eliza noticed his strange behavior. He questioned them relentlessly about their savings and plans, then insisted she remain hidden, claiming her pregnancy made her unfit for company. 2 days later, he returned alone, claiming the Harmons had chosen another guide. Yet among his possessions, Eliza noticed a child's toy horse and a woman's shawl she recognized. In her journal, she recorded, "Something is not right. His smile is kind, but his eyes have changed. He grows watchful. I pray I am mistaken." Her prayers would soon prove hollow. The next family, the Pritchards, arrived with wagons heavy with wealth. Nathaniel's charm became predatory, his questions sharper, his tone with Eliza harsh and commanding. He forbade her entirely from contact, warning that she must obey him without question. Then one night, from the direction of Devil's Gorge, she heard gunshots and screaming, a chorus that ended too swiftly. When Nathaniel returned days later with the Pritchards' horses, but not the family, his clothes stained and his story rehearsed, the fragile dream shattered. Eliza realized she was not a wife cherished by a noble man, but a witness bound to a killer. And thus the stage was set for a nightmare unlike any the frontier had yet known. Eliza Cross, pregnant at 12, isolated in a valley far from law or kin, had stumbled into the heart of a network of organized murder. In time, she would record truths that even hardened militia officers could scarcely believe. For though she was young, though her life was cut cruelly short, she carried within. The spring of 1798 carried with it a deceptive beauty. The valley where Nathaniel Cross had built his secluded cabin was alive with blooming dogwood, streams gurgling with melted snow, and birdsong echoing across the ridges. To Eliza, barely 12 years old and already heavy with child, it should have been a season of hope. Instead, the bright mornings and warm evenings masked a terror that grew sharper with each passing day. Nathaniel returned from his mysterious journeys with provisions no struggling frontiersman could acquire so easily. Bags of flour, kegs of salt, even rare luxuries such as white sugar and real coffee appeared in their cabin without explanation. Eliza, ever observant, asked him where such treasures came from. His answers were casual, too casual tales of broken wagons and grateful merchants, of friendly Cherokee chiefs eager to trade. The stories shifted with each telling, and though she tried to smother her doubts, she felt her trust beginning to unravel. Her unease sharpened when the Harmons vanished. She had seen their shy children, their weary smiles, their hopes for a new farm. Nathaniel claimed they had chosen another guide. Yet in his satchel, she discovered a silver locket she remembered hanging around Mrs. Harmon's neck, and in his chest, tucked beneath blankets, she found the carved wooden horse the Harmon boy had clutched so tightly on his first evening by their fire. Eliza wrote in her journal, "I dare not accuse him, yet my heart knows the truth. I am wife to a deceiver." It was the Pritchards' arrival that tore away all pretense. Wealthy merchants from Richmond, they brought with them wagons piled with furniture, trunks of linen, and a strong box Nathaniel could not take his eyes from. He played the role of charming host, but his manner grew colder toward Eliza. He forbade her from leaving the cabin, telling her she must stay hidden for the sake of her reputation. His voice, once soft with false tenderness, hardened into command. "You will do as I say," he warned, his hand brushing the knife at his belt. "There are matters of business beyond your understanding." From the cabin's single window, Eliza spied his long conversations with Mr. Pritchard. She listened as the merchant confided they had no surviving kin in Virginia, no one to expect letters or await their safe arrival. Nathaniel's eyes glinted with calculation. Days later, Eliza watched him lead the family toward Devil's Gorge. That night the forest erupted in chaos, gunfire cracking, horses screaming, voices crying in terror before silence fell like a shroud. 2 mornings later, Nathaniel returned, his clothes streaked with mud, leading the Pritchards' horses. The wagons were gone, the family erased. His tale of a Cherokee ambush rolled smoothly from his tongue, polished from use. But when he believed Eliza not looking, his expression betrayed satisfaction. That night, while he slept, Eliza lay rigid. Beside him, her unborn child shifting within her mind filled with images of slaughter. Her suspicions turned to certainty when she discovered the camp hidden beyond a ridge 2 miles from the cabin. Against her husband's orders, she followed the wagon ruts into the gorge. What she found turned her blood cold. There were fire pits, rope ends cut ragged, and discarded belongings, a woman's bonnet, a child's doll, a brass compass. Buried beneath a tarp lay the worst of it: trophies, locks of hair tied with ribbon, trinkets inscribed with names, and letters written in shaking hands. One note, its ink blurred by tears, read, "To whoever finds this, my name is Margaret Harmon. Our guide has betrayed us. Tell my family in North Carolina we died with love in our hearts." Eliza dropped the letter as though it had burned her skin. She knew now with terrifying clarity. Nathaniel was no guide. He was the architect of calculated murder, his victim swallowed, not by wilderness or raiders, but by his own ruthless hand. And she, his child bride, was not cherished wife, but unwitting accomplice. Her careful journals, recording routes and weather, had been his tools. aiding his slaughter. When she stumbled back to the cabin, shaken and pale, Nathaniel was already there, unpacking goods she recognized as the Pritchards. His smile faltered when he saw her, and for the first time she sensed his suspicion. That night she feigned sleep, her mind racing, her hands trembling as she clutched her diary. She wrote, "The man I thought my protector is the author of unspeakable crimes. I must find a way to live for the child I carry, though I fear his plans include neither of us." Days later, her dread deepened when she found a small leather-bound book hidden beneath her sewing basket. Its pages were filled in Nathaniel's precise hand. At first she thought it another journal, but as she read, her breath caught in her throat. It was a ledger, a record of blood. Family after family was listed in cruel detail. Names, ages, possessions, the method of their deaths. The Harmons, shot during a staged ambush. The Pritchards, poisoned with hemlock and then stabbed to mimic a raid. Each entry coldly calculated, each death treated as a transaction. At the bottom of the page lay words that froze her heart. Eliza, to be resolved after delivery. Cause of death? Childbirth, uncontested. She dropped the book, clutching her swollen belly. He planned to kill her as soon as the baby came, disguising her death as a tragedy all too common on the frontier. Her child would not be spared. The cries of an infant would only betray him. Nathaniel had written it all with chilling detachment. And worse, she discovered he was not alone. The ledger named others, at least 6 men working in concert, spread across different stretches of the trail. They shared intelligence, divided targets, and sold stolen goods through contacts in Charleston and New Orleans. 70 families, perhaps more, had already perished in their scheme. That evening, while Nathaniel tended the horses, Eliza pressed her journal against her chest and stared out the window. She saw movement among the trees, a shadowed figure, signaling to Nathaniel. Her husband nodded almost imperceptibly. She realized then that they were never truly alone. Watchers lingered always at the edge of the woods, unseen eyes measuring her every move. Fear coursed through her like wildfire. Her belly ached with the child's restless kicking, as though the infant itself shared her terror. She knew she had little time left. If she waited, she and the baby would perish. Yet how could she escape a valley surrounded by accomplices? Her every step monitored? Her chance arrived with the arrival of the Carvers. They came on a bright morning in early June, their wagon heavy with law books, furniture, and the metallic clink of coins. John Carver was a lawyer from Charleston, his wife heavily pregnant, their 2 young daughters curious and eager. Eliza's heart ached as she watched the children play near the stream. Unaware of the doom circling them. Nathaniel welcomed the family warmly, but Eliza recognized the glint in his eyes, the subtle signals exchanged with men in the trees. Carvers were marked for death, and Eliza knew in that instant that her silence would make her complicit. She had recorded horrors in her diary, but ink could not save the Carvers. Only action could. That night, while Mrs. Carver admired her stew, Eliza whispered of a secret herb and led the woman toward the stream. There, hidden from Nathaniel's gaze, she revealed fragments of the ledger she had torn free. "Your lives depend on this," she urged. At first, the woman thought her mad, but when she read the entries, when she saw the cold arithmetic of slaughter, her disbelief collapsed into terror. Eliza spoke quickly, explaining what she had learned. "He means to kill you at dawn in Devil's Gorge. He is not alone. Others wait among the trees. If you resist, you will all die." Mrs. Carver trembled, her hand on her swollen belly, whispering of her children. Eliza's voice hardened with resolve. "You must flee when I give the signal. Follow the stream east until you reach the militia post at Boone's Crossing. Do not stop. Do not look back." The woman's eyes filled with tears. What of you? Eliza touched her belly. I cannot run, but I can give you time. That night, beneath a moon veiled in clouds, Eliza prepared her desperate gambit. She gathered flint and steel, arranged piles of kindling in secret places she had scouted earlier. If she could mimic the signal fires Nathaniel's network used to warn of approaching militia, perhaps she could sow confusion and buy the carvers a chance to escape. As she lit the first blaze, sparks dancing into the night sky, the valley flared. With false warnings, Nathaniel stormed from the cabin, rage twisting his features, shouting her name into the darkness. Eliza, what have you done? His voice was not the tender tones of a husband, but the roar of a predator whose trap had been sprung. The carvers, startled awake, saw the valley burning with unnatural light. Eliza guided them to the hidden grove where she had tethered their horses. Go, she urged, pressing the reins into Mrs. Carver's hands. Run and do not stop. Someone must live. To tell the truth. As hoofbeats faded into the night, Eliza turned back toward the cabin, her diary clutched to her chest. She knew Nathaniel's wrath would fall upon her now, but she also knew that if the Carvers survived, her sacrifice would not be in vain. The nightmare was no longer confined to secret ledgers. It had ignited into open defiance. And Eliza Wren, 12 years old, pregnant and terrified, had chosen resistance over silence. The valley would burn before dawn. The night air of Raven Hollow glowed with firelight. Eliza's signal blazes leapt skyward, painting the valley in a false alarm of militia presence. To Nathaniel's hidden accomplices, the meaning was unmistakable. Lawmen were near. Confusion rippled through the darkness as shadows moved erratically among the trees, men unsure whether to strike or scatter. For the first time, the hunters felt hunted. Nathaniel stormed from the cabin, his fury unmasked. He bellowed Eliza's name, his voice carrying like a beast's roar through the forest. The man who had once spoken with practiced tenderness now revealed his truest nature. His calls were not of concern but of rage, threats that echoed with violence. Eliza crouched near a boulder, clutching her swollen belly, praying the Carvers had already reached the horses she had hidden. From the distance came the faint clatter of hooves. Relief surged through her. Her warning had been heard, and the family was fleeing. But Nathaniel's rage was relentless. Find them, he shouted into the trees. No witnesses. His men responded with hunting calls, sharp whistles and bird cries, signals of coordination. The net was drawing close. Eliza realized then that she could not remain hidden. If Nathaniel believed she had been taken by his own men, he would pursue the Carvers at once. She had to hold his attention, to make herself the quarry. Summoning courage she did not know she possessed. She rose from the shadows and stumbled toward the cabin's light, her diary clutched tight beneath her apron. Nathaniel spotted her instantly. His eyes flared with triumph, but it was edged with suspicion. You lit those fires, he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper carried on the wind. Do you know what you've done? Eliza forced her face into an expression of trembling fear. I was frightened. I thought the militia was coming. I only wished to warn you. Her voice quavered, masking the resolve burning inside. For a moment, Nathaniel studied her, weighing truth against deception. Then he grabbed her wrist, his fingers bruising her delicate skin. You will answer for this, he growled, dragging her toward the cabin. His men melted back into the forest, their confidence shaken by the false signals, their pursuit of the Carvers disorganized. Inside, the cabin felt more like a prison than ever. Nathaniel slammed the door, his fury palpable. Yet beneath his anger lay calculation. He needed her alive, at least for now. A pregnant wife lent him credibility among travelers. A grieving widower could not easily explain away a vanished child bride. He forced a smile, one that did not reach his eyes. Rest, he commanded, At dawn we leave. There will be no more mistakes." Eliza lay on the bed of furs, her body aching, her mind racing. She had given the carvers a chance, but had they escaped? Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the trees outside filled her with dread. She pressed her diary close, filling its pages by candlelight while Nathaniel pretended to sleep. "If these words survive me," she wrote, "let them speak truth. Nathaniel Cross is no guide but a butcher, part of a brotherhood of killers who prey on the innocent. If I die, let it be known that I tried to save one family, though I could not save myself." The next morning dawned gray and heavy, mist curling low through the valley. Nathaniel rose early, his movements brisk, his face hard with purpose. He loaded supplies into the wagon with mechanical precision, pausing only to watch Eliza with a predator's gaze. She obeyed silently, gathering her few belongings, her body heavy with the child that kicked, as if sensing the danger. As they set out, Eliza scanned the trail for signs of the carvers. Broken branches, hoofprints, anything that might tell her they had survived the night. But Nathaniel's eyes followed hers, and when he noticed her searching, his lips curved into a cruel smile. "Do not worry for them," he said softly. "They will trouble us no more." The words chilled her blood. Did he speak truth, or was it another manipulation meant to break her spirit? She dared not ask, for fear her desperation would betray her. She lowered her gaze, clutching her diary against her belly, her only weapon left. By midday, they reached the edge of Devil's Gorge. The path narrowed between sheer cliffs, a place of ambush where so many families had disappeared. Eliza's breath quickened as she recognized landmarks she had once recorded, unknowingly mapping the killing ground of her husband's trade. Nathaniel halted the wagon, his expression unreadable. "Stay here," he ordered. "I will scout ahead." He vanished into the gorge, leaving her alone. Eliza's heart pounded. This was her chance. If she fled into the forest, she might yet find the carvers or stumble upon militia patrols rumored to roam the region. But her swollen belly and the watchers hidden among the trees made flight impossible. She remained seated, trembling, waiting for the man she now knew intended her death. When Nathaniel returned, he was not alone. Two men emerged from the shadows. Behind him, strangers with hard eyes and muskets slung across their shoulders. They exchanged few words, but Eliza saw the ease between them. These were his accomplices, part of the network she had glimpsed in the ledger. Their presence confirmed what she had feared most. Nathaniel was only one head of a serpent coiled across the frontier. That night, as the three men feasted on meat and passed a flask between them, Eliza pretended to sleep. She listened to their conversation, every word etched into her mind. They spoke of other camps, of families marked for slaughter, of gold already waiting in Charleston. And then, as though it were the most ordinary matter, Nathaniel spoke of her. "After the child comes," he said, his voice calm, "she dies. I've written detailed complications in childbirth, nothing unusual. No one will question it." The others grunted agreement, as if discussing livestock. Eliza's breath caught, but she stilled her body, forcing her heart to slow. She dared not betray her listening. When at last the men fell into drunken slumber, she lit her candle and opened her diary. With shaking hands she wrote, "He has planned my death." The ledger records it plain. If these words endure, let them serve as warning. I am Eliza Wren, wife to Nathaniel Cross. He and his brethren are the murderers of Raven Hollow, the thieves of countless lives. Should I perish, let the truth be carried by these pages. Her tears fell onto the ink, blurring the words, but she forced herself to continue. She described the faces of the accomplices, the signals they used, the trophies she had seen. She named every family she could recall Nathaniel speaking of, every detail that might someday bring justice. In the silence of the cabin, with death hanging over her. She armed herself with words, the only weapon she could wield. The next days blurred into a grim rhythm. Nathaniel and his men scouted, hunted, schemed. Eliza cooked their meals, tended their supplies, and hid her diary in secret places. Each time Nathaniel left, she feared he would not return, not because she wished for his safety, but because his absence might mean another family had been silenced. Each night she lay awake, the child restless within her, whispering prayers for deliverance that seemed to vanish into the smoke-stained rafters. Yet hope had not abandoned her entirely. Once, while drawing water from the stream, she glimpsed a figure on horseback, far in the distance, dressed in the colors of the militia. It vanished before she could cry out, but the sight burned into her memory. Somewhere beyond the ridges, lawmen rode, and if she could only get her diary to them, the truth might yet surface. But Nathaniel was watchful. He saw the flicker of hope in her eyes and crushed it with quiet cruelty. "You dream of escape," he whispered one night, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. "But you are mine. As long as you breathe, you will serve me. And when you no longer do, the wilderness will claim you as it has so many others." Eliza turned her face away, tears sliding silently across her cheek. She knew now that survival alone was no longer enough. If she were to die, as the ledger foretold, then her death must buy something greater. The carvers, if alive, must carry her truth. And if not, her diary must reach the militia. The fires of Raven Hollow had not been enough. The reckoning would demand more. And Eliza Wren, a child forced into womanhood, braced herself for the storm yet to come. The wilderness in early summer was both breathtaking and cruel. The forests surrounding Raven Hollow seemed to bloom overnight, wildflowers dotting the meadows while dense canopies draped the valley in green. But to Eliza Wren, none of it offered peace. She was 12 years old, 7 months pregnant, and trapped in a cabin that had become nothing less than a slaughterhouse. Every sound of an approaching wagon made her heart lurch, for she knew what it meant, another family walking toward. Their deaths. Nathaniel Cross, with his disarming smile and cultivated charm, carried himself as if nothing was amiss. To strangers, he was a dependable guide, a man whose youthful wife and expectant child proved his stability. But to Eliza, he had become a stranger in his own right. The softness of his words had given way to commands barked like orders. His touch, once feigned tender, now carried the grip of ownership. His accomplices appeared more frequently as spring turned to summer. 2 men at first, then others. They came in the dusk hours, never lingering long, speaking in hushed tones, while Nathaniel handed over goods taken from vanished families. They bore the look of predators hard-eyed, sharp with suspicion, and utterly void of compassion. Eliza avoided their gaze, her body bowed under the weight of both her child and her terror. She knew now that these were not occasional visitors. This was a network, spread across the wilderness, bound together by greed and blood. It was during one of these visits that Eliza discovered the full truth of her captivity. Nathaniel, believing her busy with chores, left his ledger exposed on the table. She had already seen fragments of it enough to know it catalogued lives stolen. But that day, she forced herself to read page after page, committing every detail to memory. The entries were chilling in their precision. Families were listed not as people, but as accounts, names, origins, possessions, and methods of disposal. April 12th, Harmon family. 3 children. Assets, modest. Method, staged raid. Another entry read, April 28th, Richards. Significant assets. Method, hemlock, then knives. It was written with a cold detachment that made Eliza's skin crawl. Each line was a tally of death, and each death another stone in the foundation of Nathaniel's empire. But one entry froze her blood. August Eliza, to be resolved post-delivery. Cover: complications in childbirth. Expected outcome uncontested. Her name written in the same neat script as all the others. Her fate recorded before it had even occurred. She clutched her belly, the child within stirring, and fought to keep her breath steady. She was not only a witness. She was next. That night, when Nathaniel returned from the woods, she forced herself into silence. She cooked their supper, listened to his practiced stories of safe routes and friendly encounters, and pretended not to know that he had already written her death. But when she lay in the dark, her diary pressed to her chest, she let her tears fall freely. She wrote by candlelight, "If I perish, it will not be in silence. These pages will bear the truth. If they are ever found, let them show the world the scale of what has been done." Her chance to act came sooner than expected. In early June, the Carvers arrived. A prosperous lawyer from Charleston, John Carver traveled with his wife, 2 daughters, and a wagon so laden with goods it creaked under the weight. They were respectable, educated, and visibly wealthy. Nathaniel greeted them with exaggerated warmth, his eyes glinting with calculation. Eliza saw the subtle gestures between him and the men in the trees, the unspoken agreement that this family was marked. The Carver daughters played by the stream, their laughter piercing Eliza's heart. One of them, Sarah, no older than 10, approached her shyly. "Are you really married?" The child asked. "Mama says I'll not wed until I'm grown, but you seem so wise already." The innocence of the question nearly broke her. She saw herself reflected in Sarah, just a girl, too young to understand the dangers circling her. That evening, Eliza made her choice. She could not stand by and let this family vanish like the Harmons and the Pritchards. When Mrs. Carver praised the stew, Eliza seized her chance. "There is a special herb I use," she said aloud. Then, lowering her voice, she added, "I can show you where it grows." By the stream, she revealed fragments of the ledger she had hidden beneath her apron. Mrs. Carver at first shook her head, certain that Eliza was delirious from pregnancy. But as she read the names, the methods, and the precise entries, her expression collapsed into terror. "My God," she whispered, her hands trembling. "How many? How long has this been happening?" Eliza's voice was steady, though her body quaked. 3 years at least, perhaps more. He means to kill you at dawn. Devil's Gorge is the chosen place. You must escape." Mrs. Carver's eyes filled with tears as she looked toward her daughters. "The children, they still have a chance," Eliza insisted. "When the fires are lit, you must run. Follow the stream east. Do not stop until you reach the militia post at Boone's Crossing. Do not look back. What of you?" Mrs. Carver asked, her voice breaking. Eliza shook her head. "I cannot flee. My child weighs me down, and I am watched too closely. But if I stay, I can distract him. I can give you time." That night, Eliza prepared her signal fires. She arranged piles of kindling throughout the valley, just as Nathaniel's men did to warn of militia patrols. Only these fires would not be truth, but deception, a web of light to confuse and scatter the killers. When the moon rose, she struck flint against steel. Flames caught and spread, casting unnatural warnings into the sky. The effect was immediate. Nathaniel burst from the cabin, his face twisted with fury. "Eliza!" He roared, the name no longer. Tender but spat like a curse. His men stumbled through the trees, uncertain whether to flee or attack. In the chaos, the Carvers slipped away, guided by Eliza's whispered instructions and the hidden horses she had prepared. But Eliza watched them vanish into the night, hope flickering like the flames she had set, but she knew what would follow. Nathaniel's wrath was a storm already building. She returned to the cabin, clutching her diary, her body trembling yet resolute. When he found her waiting by the fire, his eyes burned with suspicion. "You," he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "You lit those fires. You betrayed me." Eliza met his gaze, her fear buried beneath a fragile defiance. "I only wished to warn you," she whispered. Nathaniel's hand tightened around her arm, his grip bruising. "At dawn," he said coldly, "we leave. Pray the wilderness has mercy, for I will not." That night, as Nathaniel slept beside her, Eliza wrote furiously in her diary. Her words spilled across the pages in uneven script. "The Carvers may live. If they reach safety, the truth will out. If they do not, these words must speak for me. Nathaniel Cross is not alone. There are others, hidden in the forests, tied together in a brotherhood of blood. I am marked for death, my child with me. But tonight I have stolen from him the certainty of silence." She hid the diary beneath the furs, kissed its warm cover, and whispered a prayer. Outside, the fires smoldered, their smoke curling into the night sky like a signal to heaven itself that by morning the valley would be different. Either the Carvers would reach safety, or Nathaniel would hunt them down. For Eliza, there was no turning back. She had crossed the line from witness to resister, and in doing so, she had sealed her fate. The reckoning was coming. The night of fire had unsettled the valley, but dawn arrived cold and merciless. Smoke still clung to the ridges where Eliza's signal blazes had burned, leaving the air sharp with the scent of char. Nathaniel Cross woke early, his mood as black as the ashes. He moved with a restless energy, pacing the cabin, his eyes flicking toward Eliza with a suspicion that never softened. She had not slept. Her body ached beneath the weight of her pregnancy, yet her mind was sharpened by fear. She knew her gamble. With the fires had bought the Carvers a chance, but had they reached safety? Or were they now lying broken in some hidden gorge, claimed by Nathaniel's men? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but she clung to the hope that at least her sacrifice had given them time. Nathaniel's men returned just after sunrise. Their boots struck hard against the packed earth, their faces set with grim expressions. Eliza watched from the doorway as they spoke with her husband in hushed, urgent tones. She could not hear every word, but fragments carried on the morning breeze. Militia patrols, abandoned camps, signal fires seen from miles away. Nathaniel's jaw clenched tighter with each report. When the men finally departed, vanishing once more into the forest, Nathaniel returned to the cabin. His composure was brittle, his charm a mask too thin to conceal the fury beneath. "You've made things difficult," he told Eliza, his voice low and dangerous. "The fires drew attention we cannot afford. Do you understand what that means?" Eliza lowered her eyes, forcing her voice into a tremor. I thought I was helping." He studied her, his gaze sharp, searching for cracks. Then, with a cold laugh, he shook his head. "You are a foolish child. Lucky for you, I still have use for you. A grieving widower draws suspicion, but a devoted husband? That is a mask no one questions." Her stomach twisted at his words. She was not wife, but shield, her swollen belly nothing more than camouflage for his crimes. Yet even as despair pressed upon her, she forced herself to remain calm. Panic would only betray her, and she could not afford to lose the sliver of control she still held. Her silence, her diary, and the faint hope that the Carvers had escaped. By mid-morning, Nathaniel insisted they leave the cabin. He claimed they needed to travel north to distance themselves from the false signal fires and any patrols they might have roused. Eliza knew better. The move was not protection, but preparation. He wished to erase evidence, to carry her deeper into wilderness where discovery was less likely. The trail wound steeply upward, the wagon creaking beneath the weight of supplies stripped from his victims. Nathaniel walked ahead, guiding the horses, his posture rigid. Eliza sat on the seat, the reins in her trembling hands, her eyes scanning the forest for any sign of life. Every snapping twig set her heart racing. Were those Nathaniel's accomplices? Or perhaps, though she hardly dared to hope, militia? Scouts drawn by the fires? At midday, they reached a clearing high on a ridge. From there, the valley spread wide below them, dotted with dark patches where smoke still curled. Nathaniel paused, his gaze sweeping the horizon. His face betrayed a flicker of unease. Eliza followed his eyes and saw what he had seen. A faint trail of riders moving in the far distance. Militia. Hope flared within her chest, but she masked it quickly. Nathaniel spat into the dirt, muttering curses. "They're closer than I thought," he growled. "We'll have to move faster." The descent from the ridge was treacherous, a narrow path carved between jagged rocks. The wagon lurched dangerously, and more than once Eliza thought it might tip. But Nathaniel's hand was steady on the reins, his control unnervingly sure. He had traveled this route many times, perhaps leading victims to their deaths, perhaps escaping lawmen who had come too close. By evening, they reached a hollow thick with old oaks. Nathaniel declared it safe for the night. He tethered the horses, then vanished into the trees under the pretense of hunting. Eliza knew he was likely meeting with his men, strategizing their next move. Left alone, she sat near the dying fire, her hands cradling her belly, her diary open across her lap. She wrote furiously by the fading light. "Today I saw riders, far off but real. The militia is near. If these words reach them, let them know." Nathaniel Cross leads a network of killers who have claimed at least 70 families. I do not know if I will live to see them, but perhaps they will find this book. If so, let them carry justice where I cannot. She tucked the diary into a gap between stones near the fire pit, covering it with ash. If Nathaniel discovered it, her life would end sooner than planned. But if the militia stumbled upon their camp, perhaps they would find the truth hidden there. When Nathaniel returned, he carried a brace of rabbits and the smell of smoke clinging to his clothes. He eyed her warily, as though sensing secrets. "You've been writing again," he said, his tone half accusation, half mockery. Eliza forced a small smile. "It comforts me. Mama always said words could keep fear away." He studied her, his eyes narrowing. Then he shrugged, tossing the rabbits onto the table. "Write what you like. None will ever read it." But Eliza knew better. If she could not survive, her words must. The following morning brought fresh dread. Nathaniel roused her before dawn, his voice brisk. "We're moving again. I want distance before the militia closes in." He said it with irritation, but beneath his words she sensed fear. For the first time, Nathaniel Cross was unsettled. The trail twisted deeper into the forest, the trees crowding thick around them. Eliza clung to the wagon's edge, her body weary, her mind aflame with questions. How many miles lay between them and the militia? Had the carvers survived to deliver warning? Or had Nathaniel's men silenced them before they reached safety? By midday, they reached Devil's Gorge again, though from a different approach. The cliffs rose steep and forbidding, their shadows swallowing the light. Nathaniel halted the wagon near a cluster of rocks. "Rest," he commanded. "I'll scout ahead." He disappeared into the gorge, leaving her alone. Eliza's pulse quickened. The gorge was death's mouth. She knew that now. Countless families had vanished here, their screams muffled by stone. And if Nathaniel's plan held, she too would die here once the child was born. Her thoughts raced. She could not run not, with her swollen belly and the forest crawling with accomplices. But she could prepare. She searched the wagon quietly, her hands trembling as she rifled through crates and sacks. Beneath a folded blanket she found it, a pistol loaded and oiled, one she had seen Nathaniel use in the past. She gripped it with both hands, her breath unsteady. She had never fired in earnest, but Nathaniel himself had once taught her to aim. The weight of the weapon steadied her trembling. For the first time, she felt not entirely powerless. If he tried to end her life, she could strike back. When Nathaniel returned, his face was calm, his smile practiced. "The path is clear," he announced. But his eyes lingered on her hands, as if he sensed the hidden pistol beneath her apron. He said nothing, only urged her into the wagon once more. As the sun dipped low, they entered the gorge. The air was thick and still, the silence oppressive. Eliza clutched the pistol in her lap, her diary pressed against her belly, her heart beating in violent rhythm. She knew the end was coming. Whether it meant death, escape, or something in between, the gorge would decide her fate. Behind them, somewhere far off, the echo of hoofbeats carried faintly through the stone corridors. The militia was closing in. And Eliza Wren, child bride and unwilling witness, was caught between the jaws of the wilderness and the wrath of a killer. The chase at dawn had only begun. The shadows of Devil's Gorge swallowed the wagon whole. High cliffs loomed on either side, their jagged faces rising like walls built by ancient hands. The path was narrow, hemmed in by stone, where sound carried in strange echoes. Even the horses seemed uneasy, their ears flicking back at every noise. For Eliza Wren, seated stiffly with the hidden pistol beneath her apron, it felt less like a trail and more like a grave waiting to be filled. Nathaniel Cross walked ahead with practice confidence, his stride unhurried, as though the canyon belonged to him. And in a way, it did. This was his hunting ground, his stage for the countless deaths he had orchestrated. Eliza's mind replayed the gunshots she had heard weeks before, the screams that had cut so suddenly to silence. She knew now that those cries had not been the chaos of ambush, but the careful choreography of murder. Her child shifted within her, a painful reminder of the future she might never see. Each kick felt like both a plea and a warning. She pressed her hand against her belly and whispered a silent vow. If she could not survive, then she would at least leave behind the truth. The gorge twisted sharply, revealing a cavern mouth yawning. Dark against the stone, Nathaniel raised his hand, signaling a halt. "We'll camp here tonight," he said, his voice carrying easily in the stillness. "The gorge is too dangerous to cross in fading light." Eliza's heart pounded. She recognized the place from her earlier exploration. This was the hidden camp where she had discovered the trophies, the discarded belongings, the letters of the dead. Her breath caught at the memory of Margaret Harmon's trembling farewell scrawled on torn parchment. Now she was returning, not as a secret witness, but as the next name in the ledger. Nathaniel guided the horses toward the cave, unhitched the wagon, and set about building a fire. His movements were methodical, almost ritualistic. Eliza watched him through lowered lashes, her hand tight around the pistol hidden in her skirts. She considered raising it, ending everything with a single shot. But the thought of his accomplices lurking nearby froze her. If she killed him and failed to flee far enough, the others would finish what he had begun. Instead, she focused on survival through secrecy. When Nathaniel left the fire to fetch water from a nearby stream, she stole a moment to uncover her diary. She tore out fresh pages and wrote hurriedly by the flicker of flame. "We are at Devil's Gorge. He means for me to die here. His ledger names me as already dead. If these pages are found, know that Nathaniel Cross and his brethren are guilty of slaughtering families beyond count. The gorge itself holds their graves." She tucked the pages beneath a loose stone near the fire pit, covering it with dirt. If nothing else, perhaps some future traveler would stumble upon the record. Nathaniel returned, his expression unreadable. He studied her face, then the fire, then her hands. "You've grown quiet," he said softly, almost with mock concern. Thinking of escape, Eliza forced a shake of her head. "I think only of the child," she whispered. He crouched beside her, his gaze fixed on her swollen belly. "When it comes, things will change," he murmured, though his voice held. "No warmth. Children are loud, fragile. Out here, such burdens do not last." His meaning was unmistakable. That night, Eliza barely closed her eyes. She listened to the crackle of the fire, the restless shifting of the horses, and Nathaniel's steady breathing as he slept. Every sound of the wilderness became a warning, the howl of a distant wolf, the rustle of leaves high on the cliffs, the faint clatter of stones dislodged by unseen feet. She knew they were not alone. His accomplices were near, watching from the shadows, guarding their secret enterprise dot by morning. A cave's walls glowed faintly with reflected light. Nathaniel was already awake, sorting supplies with the meticulous care of a man preparing for business. He beckoned her closer. "I want you to see something," he said. Her stomach nodded as she followed him deeper into the cavern. The air grew cooler, damp with the scent of earth. At the far wall, tucked behind a cluster of rocks, Nathaniel revealed a wooden chest. He lifted the lid to expose piles of goods, jewelry, coin, documents, clothing, trophies of the dead. "This," he explained, his tone almost reverent, "is the future. Not farming, not guiding families to promised land. Wealth, power, enough to buy respect in any city east of the mountains." He turned his eyes on her, sharp as a blade. "You will keep these records, Eliza. Your handwriting, your memory. That is your gift. Together, we can grow this beyond Raven Hollow. You'll be the keeper of our empire." Eliza felt bile rise in her throat. He spoke as if she were an accomplice, as if her role were not victim but partner. She forced herself to nod, knowing any resistance now would seal her fate. Inside, however, she vowed that her gift for words would be his undoing. That evening, as Nathaniel sorted trinkets and tallied coins, Eliza pretended to mend her apron. In truth, she slipped another set of diary pages into the chest, hidden beneath folded cloth. She filled them with names, dates, and descriptions of the accomplices she had overheard. If the chest were ever discovered, her words would expose the truth. When Nathaniel finally laid down to sleep, Eliza sat awake in the cave's mouth, her eyes drawn to the narrow slice of moon overhead. She thought of the carvers. Had they survived? Or had Nathaniel's men caught them in the night? She prayed they had reached Boone's Crossing. That militia now rode with knowledge of what lurked in these hills. Her child stirred again, a strong kick against her ribs. She placed her hand on her belly, whispering, "We will not be forgotten." The next day, the gorge rang with gunfire. It came faint at first, echoing from the distance, but Nathaniel stiffened instantly. He strode to the cave entrance, his face tightening. "Militia," he muttered. His men emerged from the trees within minutes, their expressions grim. One carried a bloodied sash, the kind worn by soldiers. "They're closer than expected." The man said, "Carvers must have made it." At those words, hope flared inside Eliza like a spark to tinder. The carvers had lived. They had reached safety. They had spoken the truth. Nathaniel's fury ignited. "We move tonight," he snarled. "Burn this camp. Leave nothing." The men obeyed, scattering to dismantle evidence, tossing belongings into the fire. Eliza watched in horror as the chest itself was dragged into the flames, years of death reduced to ash. But she took small comfort in the knowledge that not everything had been lost. Her hidden pages beneath the stones, her diary buried in the ridge, they still remained. That night, the camp was consumed in smoke. Nathaniel paced like a caged animal, his mind racing, his mask of charm shattered. Eliza knew he would not risk her presence much longer. She was too dangerous now knowing, too close to the truth. She clutched her diary tight, writing by the glow of the fire. The Carvers have lived. I know it. His men fear the militia. If this is my last night, let it be known I tried. I lit the fires. I told the truth. My name is Eliza Wren, and I will not go quietly. As the flames devoured the trophies of the dead, Eliza's words became the only remaining record dot, and with every crack of gunfire echoing closer through Devil's Gorge, she sensed that the reckoning was no longer far away. The night in Devil's Gorge ended with smoke still drifting from the charred remains of the camp. Ash floated like snow through the canyon air, settling on Eliza Wren's hair and skin, leaving her feeling already half a ghost. Nathaniel Cross had destroyed the chest of trophies, burning away the evidence of years of slaughter. Yet the smell of scorched cloth and bone lingered like a truth that refused to die at dawn. Nathaniel's men grew restless. They spoke in urgent tones, their voices low, though fragments reached Eliza's ears. Riders closing in, one warned. They've crossed the ridge, another spat into the dirt. They'll find the gorge. They'll find us. Nathaniel silenced them with a sharp gesture. Ben will not be here when they arrive. We move east by the river. His tone was iron, but his eyes betrayed the flicker of doubt. For the first time, Eliza saw cracks in his control. The caravan formed quickly. Horses were loaded, supplies strapped down, and the narrow gorge trail abandoned. They cut toward the river, the sound of rushing water growing louder as they descended. Eliza followed silently, her hands trembling within her lap, her diary hidden in the folds of her dress. She did not know if the militia was close enough to save her, but she prayed they were. The river cut through the gorge with violent force, a torrent churning over jagged stone. Nathaniel led them along its banks, seeking shallows where horses could cross. His men fanned out, watching the ridges nervously, muskets at the ready. Eliza felt her breath catch at every movement of shadow, wondering if riders might appear above them. Hours passed with no sign of pursuit. Still, Nathaniel's fury smoldered. He stopped often to scan the horizon, muttering curses. Once he turned on Eliza with sudden venom. If they come, it's because of you. Do you understand? Your fires, your meddling, your weakness. Eliza forced herself to meet his gaze. If they come, she whispered, it is because of what you have done. For a moment, his face twisted with something raw, almost fear. Then he struck her across the cheek, the blow sharp enough to draw blood. She stumbled, but did not fall. Her child shifted painfully within her, reminding her that she was not alone. By late afternoon, they reached a bend in the river, where cliffs pressed tight against the water. The current slowed, forming deep pools ringed by mossy stones. Nathaniel ordered the group to rest, though Eliza sensed it was not rest he sought but strategy. He stood apart, speaking in low tones with two of his men, gesturing often toward her. Their eyes followed his hand, cold and appraising. That night, Eliza lay awake on the damp ground, listening to the river's endless roar. She knew Nathaniel was deciding her fate, weighing whether to use her still as camouflage or to silence her forever before the militia drew near. She clutched the pistol hidden beneath her skirts, her only fragile defense. Her chance came in the other small hours of morning. She rose under pretense of fetching water, her steps careful, her breath shallow. At the river's edge, she pulled her diary from its hiding place and tore free another set of pages. She placed them inside a tin box she found among the supplies, once used for tea, and wedged it beneath a cluster of stones in the shallows. The current licked against it, tugging, but the rocks held. On those pages, she had written, Nathaniel Cross leads not alone, but as part of a brotherhood. They stalk the wilderness from Raven Hollow to Boone's Crossing, Families vanish by his hand. If this box is found, let the world know it was not by accident, but by design, and let justice fall like thunder. When she returned to the camp, Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. "Where were you?" "Water," she whispered, lifting the filled bucket. He stared a moment longer and turned away. But Eliza saw it in his face. Suspicion had grown. A weed now rooted deeply. By dawn, the sound of pursuit became undeniable. Hoofbeats echoed faintly across the ridges, carried on the wind. Nathaniel cursed, rallying his men. "We ride," he commanded, forcing Eliza onto the wagon. "If they catch us, none will live to tell the tale." The chase began. The wagon jolted violently over stone as horses thundered along the riverbank. Muskets cracked, their shots echoing off the cliffs. Eliza clutched the seat, her body jolted with each lurch. Behind them, the militia appeared on the ridge, a line of riders in blue and gray, their banners snapping in the wind. The men around Nathaniel fired desperately, their bullets sparking against rock. One rider fell, his horse tumbling into the river below. But more came, relentless, closing the distance. Nathaniel urged the horses harder, his face twisted in rage. "Faster," he bellowed. "We'll lose them in the bend." But the river betrayed him. The bend narrowed into a gorge, so tight the wagon could not pass. Water surged against the cliffs, impassable for horses. Nathaniel cursed, yanking the reins, but the militia was already upon them. Gunfire erupted in chaos. Smoke filled the gorge, shouts mingling with the crack of musket fire. Nathaniel's men fell one by one, their cries lost to the roar of the river. Eliza crouched low, shielding her belly, the pistol clutched tight in her hand. Through the haze, she saw Nathaniel locked in combat with a militia officer, their blades flashing in the dim light. Blood sprayed across the stones. Nathaniel fought like a cornered beast, his charm stripped away, revealing the raw savagery beneath. Eliza raised the pistol, her hands shaking. She had one chance, one moment, to end the terror that had consumed her life. But as she aimed, a cry escaped her lips, sharp and piercing. Her body convulsed with pain, her vision blurred. The child had chosen that moment to come. She collapsed onto the stones, the pistol clattering from her grasp. The world spun, filled with smoke, screams, and the endless roar of the river. She felt hands on her shoulders, rough yet urgent, dragging her from the fray. Voices shouted above her, though she could not understand the words. Through the haze of pain, she glimpsed Nathaniel once more. Bloodied but still alive, he staggered into the river, vanishing into the current. Whether he had fallen or fled, she could not tell. A militia fired after him, but the torrent carried him away, swallowed whole by the wild. Eliza's body shook with agony, the child within forcing its way into the world. She cried out, not in fear but in defiance, her voice carrying across the gorge. She had survived the fires, the ledger, the cave of confessions. Now she would survive this as darkness closed around her. She clutched at the memory of the hidden pages beneath the stones, the diary buried in ridges, the words scattered like seeds. Even if she did not live to raise her child, her truth would. The river had swallowed Nathaniel Cross, but for Eliza Wren, the ordeal was far from over. She lay on the cold stones, her body racked by waves of pain, more consuming than any fear she had ever known. The militia's muskets still cracked in the distance, echoing along the cliffs, but her world had narrowed to the relentless rhythm of agony. To the child that demanded life in the midst of death, strong arms lifted her. Voices surrounded her, sharp with urgency. "She's alive." Someone shouted, "Get her clear of the bank." Eliza's vision blurred, but she caught glimpses of uniforms, of men with soot-streaked faces, their eyes burning with determination. They carried her to a patch of ground sheltered by willows, where the roar of the river softened to a distant thunder. "Stay with us, miss," one of them urged, his voice steady despite the chaos. "You're safe now. We've got you." Safe. The word rang hollow in her mind. How could she be safe when Nathaniel's shadow still lingered, when his brotherhood might yet be out there, watching from the trees? Still, she clung to it because she had no choice. Safety was not certainty, but hope, and hope was all she had left. The militia officer knelt beside her. He was young, with sharp eyes and a face hardened by war, yet softened now with compassion. "The baby's coming," he said firmly. "We'll help you through it. You just hold on." Eliza's body convulsed, her cries piercing the wilderness. The men worked with awkward tenderness, some turning their faces away, others offering whispered prayers. Cloth was fetched, water carried from the river, hands held steady beneath her trembling form. She had no midwife, no mother at her side, no gentle guidance through the storm. Only strangers bound to her by duty, men who had come seeking justice and found instead a girl torn between life and death. Hours blurred together. Each contraction ripped through her, leaving her gasping. She thought of her mother's warnings, of Margaret Harmon's farewell, scrawled in desperation, of the countless women whose cries had gone unanswered in the gorge. Would she be just another name whispered in sorrow? Or could she break the cycle, bringing forth life where so much death had reigned? At last, with one final cry that seemed to tear her soul in two, the child was born. A thin wail cut through. The air, high and fragile, yet unmistakably alive. Eliza collapsed back against the earth, tears streaming down her face. "A boy," one of the men announced softly, holding the small bundle swaddled in cloth. "He's strong. He's breathing." They placed the child in her arms, and for a moment the horrors of the past months fell away. She looked into his tiny face, his eyes still closed, his fists clenched tight. He was proof that Nathaniel Cross had not won. Life had emerged from the darkness, fragile yet unbroken. Eliza whispered his name through trembling lips. "Samuel." The officer crouched. Beside her, his voice quiet. "Miss Wren, we'll get you both to Boone's Crossing. You'll be safe there, I promise you. The men who did this will answer for it." She nodded weakly, though doubt lingered in her heart. Nathaniel had vanished into the river, his body unclaimed. Men like him had a way of surviving, of slipping back into shadow. Yet she would not let fear rule her. Samuel needed her strength, and for him she would endure. The journey to Boone's Crossing took 2 days. The militia moved carefully, wary of ambush, for though they had scattered Nathaniel's men, whispers of others remained. Eliza rode in a wagon, lined with blankets. Samuel nestled at her side. She slept in snatches, waking often to his cries, her body aching from both childbirth and the long months of fear. Yet each cry reminded her that he lived, that she had not been broken. When they reached the town, word of her survival spread quickly. People gathered in the streets, their faces pale with shock as they heard fragments of her story. Families whispered of loved ones who had vanished on the trail, their grief now sharpened by confirmation of foul play. The name Nathaniel Cross became a curse spoken in hushed voices, a symbol of betrayal and blood. Eliza was taken into the care of a widow named Martha Briggs, a stern yet kind woman who kept a small home near the chapel. Martha tended to her wounds, offered milk for the baby, and listened with solemn silence as Eliza recounted her ordeal. When she finished, Martha clasped her hand and said, "Child, you have carried the truth through fire. Do not let anyone take it from you now." In the weeks that followed, Eliza's diary became her weapon. She transcribed every memory, every conversation overheard, every detail of Nathaniel's crimes, and the brotherhood that had aided him. She listed names, places, dates, and the hidden camps she had seen. Her words, once a secret comfort, were now testimony, a weapon sharper than any blade. But fear lingered. She dreamed often of the river, of Nathaniel's bloodied face as he vanished into the current. In her dreams, he emerged again, dripping with water, his eyes burning with rage. She would wake in a cold sweat, clutching Samuel to her chest, whispering prayers that the river had claimed him for good. The militia scoured the gorge for weeks, but no body was ever found. Some believed he had drowned, carried miles downstream to a nameless grave. Others whispered he had escaped, wounded but alive, plotting vengeance. Boone's Crossing grew uneasy. Doors locked earlier at night. Rifles kept loaded by the hearth. Eliza tried to build a semblance of peace. She walked the town streets with Samuel in her arms, feeling the eyes of strangers upon her. Some looked with pity, others with awe, as though she were both survivor and omen. She bore their stares with quiet dignity, knowing that her story had become larger than herself. One evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows lengthened across the valley, Martha found her seated by the window, diary open on her lap. "You've written enough to condemn a dozen men," Martha said softly, "but it will only matter if someone listens. Are you prepared for that?" Eliza looked down at Samuel, asleep in her arms. "I am," she whispered, "because if I stay silent, then Nathaniel wins. And I will not let my son grow in a world where monsters walk free, their crimes buried in ash and stone." Martha nodded, her eyes filled with both sorrow and pride. "Then you must tell it all, child. No matter how dark, no matter who trembles at the truth." Eliza closed the diary, her decision set. She would not only survive, she would bear witness. And as she kissed Samuel's forehead, she knew that his life would be the anchor that held her steady in the storm to come. The wilderness had taken everything from her, but in the same breath it had given her something that could not be stolen: a son, a voice, and a truth that would not die. Autumn descended upon Boone's Crossing with an early chill, the air sharp with the scent of wood smoke. Life in the town moved with a quiet rhythm, yet beneath the surface unease lingered. Stories of Nathaniel Cross and his hidden brotherhood spread like wildfire. Families whispered of those who had vanished on the trail, and more than one widow came forward to say she had trusted a guide who never returned. For Eliza Wren, the weeks after Samuel's birth became a season of fragile recovery. Her body healed slowly, her nights broken by the child's cries and by dreams of the river. Yet she clung to the fragile routine, nursing her son in Martha Briggs's small home, writing by lamplight, and waiting for the day when her voice would be demanded. That day came sooner than she expected. A messenger from the militia arrived with papers, summoning her to testify before a gathering of local officials, ministers, and townsfolk. The town had no formal court, but the meeting would serve as trial and tribunal both. The names she had written, the stories she had carried, were to be spoken aloud. Martha looked at her with steady eyes as she read the summons. "You must be ready for their disbelief," she warned. "Men of stature will not want to admit such horrors could fester in their own valleys. They may call you hysterical, or worse." Eliza nodded, though fear churned in her stomach. But the truth must be spoken. For Samuel, for all of them. On the morning of the gathering, the chapel bell tolled, summoning the town. Eliza walked through the streets with Samuel in her arms, Martha at her side. People lined the path, their eyes following her, whispering in tones both reverent and doubtful. Some saw her as a heroine, others as a cursed reminder of darkness, best left unspoken. Inside the chapel, wooden benches creaked beneath the weight of men and women eager for answers. At the front sat militia officers, ministers, and the mayor. Of Boone's Crossing, a stern man with deep lines etched into his face. They called Eliza forward, and she stood before them, her diary clasped tight in her hands. Her voice trembled at first as she began, but steadied with each word. She told them of Nathaniel Cross, of his charm that masked cruelty, of the ledger listing families marked for death. She spoke of the hidden cave, the chest of trophies, the fires that had burned as signals, the militia's desperate chase along the river. She did not spare herself. She told them of her child-bride marriage, of the nights of fear, of the blows, and the threats. The room fell silent, save for the scratch of quills as clerks recorded her words. Faces hardened, some with anger, others with disbelief. A man rose from the benches, his voice sharp. You expect us to believe one man, even with accomplices, slaughtered dozens of families without word reaching us until now? Eliza met his gaze. Yes, she said firmly, because no one wanted to believe. They trusted him. They welcomed him. And the wilderness swallows the truth as easily as it swallows bodies. Another voice called out, this one from a grieving widow. My, Thomas vanished on that trail. You swear you saw his name in that ledger? Tears filled Eliza's eyes. I did, and I wrote it down so that it would not be lost. She held up the diary, its pages thick with testimony. If you will not believe me, then believe the words I carried through fire and blood. The widow wept openly, her sobs filling the chapel. The silence that followed was heavy as stone. The mayor leaned forward, his voice low but firm. You have spoken of accomplices, of a brotherhood. Who were they? Eliza listed names, those she had overheard in hushed conversations, or seen moving, in and out of the camps. Men from nearby towns, some respected, others drifters, who had vanished without notice. She described their faces, their habits, their whispered oaths of loyalty. Each name seemed to tighten the air, to cast suspicion across the room. When she finished, the militia captain rose. We will pursue them, he promised, his voice carrying across the pews. We will not rest until every last one is found. But the mayor's expression darkened. And Nathaniel Cross himself? His body was never recovered. Eliza's voice caught, but she forced herself to answer. The river took him. I saw him fall. Whether it claimed him or carried him, I cannot say, but he is not a man who surrenders easily. A murmur rippled through the room, half fear, half doubt. The thought of him alive, waiting in shadow, unsettled even the bravest hearts. After hours of testimony, the gathering ended. Eliza was escorted back to Martha's home, Samuel cradled against her chest. She felt drained, as though every word had been carved from her bones. Yet she also felt lighter, as if the truth had at last been lifted from silence into the light. But light invited danger. That night, a stone shattered the window of Martha's house. When they rushed outside, they found no one, only a crude message scrawled on the wall. Lies. Silence her. Eliza's blood turned to ice. The Brotherhood had heard her testimony. They were not gone. Martha pulled her inside, bolting the door. You see? The truth unsettles them. That means it has power. Eliza sat by the hearth, Samuel clutched tight in her arms. The firelight flickered across her face, casting shadows like scars. Then I must not stop. Even if they come for me, I must not stop. The weeks that followed brought both hope and dread. Some towns rallied to her words, forming militias of their own, scouring the valleys for Nathaniel's men. Others resisted, unwilling to face the depth of corruption in their midst. Rumors spread that Nathaniel had been seen along the riverbanks, wounded but alive. Farmers whispered of missing livestock, of strangers lurking near their cabins at night. Eliza wrote each rumor down, recording it as part of her testimony. The truth, she told Martha, is not just what happened, but what follows after. If his shadow remains, it must be remembered. And in quiet moments, when Samuel slept against her chest, she prayed not for her own safety, but for his. She had brought him into a world scarred by blood, yet she hoped he might grow to see a day when such horrors were only stories told in warning. The trial of truth had begun, not just in the chapel, but in the hearts of every soul who heard her story. And Eliza Wren knew that once spoken, truth could not be buried again, but it could still be silenced in somewhere beyond Boone's Crossing. In the wilderness that had swallowed so many, the possibility lingered that Nathaniel Cross was not dead at all. Winter pressed its weight upon Boone's Crossing. Snow blanketed the roofs and roads, and smoke curled steadily from chimneys, carrying the scent of oak and pine. For most, the season meant hearth and family, but for Eliza Wren, it carried the constant thrum of unease. She could not step outside without feeling eyes upon her. Each creak of the floorboards in Martha Briggs's home made her heart jolt. Even Samuel's soft cries at night carried her mind to the thought of Nathaniel Cross lurking just beyond the door. Though her testimony had shaken the town, not all were convinced. Some argued she sought attention, others that her mind had been broken by grief and hardship. Yet the broken window and the threat scrawled on Martha's wall were proof enough to Eliza that the brotherhood had not vanished. They were waiting, watching, deciding when to strike. Her fears deepened one bitter evening as she walked home from the chapel. Samuel slept in her arms, bundled tightly against the cold. The streets were near empty, snow crunching under her boots. Yet behind her, she heard the faint scrape of footsteps matching her own. She turned sharply, but the street was bare, shadows stretching long across the snow. Still, she knew. She could feel it. Someone followed her. Back inside Martha's house, she bolted the door and sat trembling by the fire, whispering to Samuel. "He's out there," she said softly. "He's waiting." The militia patrolled more often now, but even they admitted their searches had turned up nothing. No sign of Nathaniel's body, no trace of his closest men. The wilderness seemed to conspire in hiding them. Rumors spread through Boone's Crossing like frost, creeping across glass of cabins burned in the night, of travelers gone missing along the ridge. Always the same whispered conclusion: Nathaniel Cross still lived. For Eliza, each rumor cut deeper. She had seen him fall, bloodied, into the river's current. She had prayed the water had swallowed him whole. But her prayers felt unanswered. If he lived, then her testimony had painted a target not only on her, but on Samuel. One night, unable to sleep, she sat at the small table by the fire, her diary open. The lamplight flickered across the page as she wrote, "If Nathaniel lives, then he will not rest until I am silenced. My words threaten him more than muskets. I must prepare for the day he comes, for I know it will come. And if I am gone, let this book tell the truth he fears." Martha found her there at dawn, ink smudged on her fingers, Samuel sleeping in his cradle. "Child, you cannot live only in fear," Martha said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You must also live in defiance." Eliza looked at her, exhausted but resolute. "Defiance is all that keeps me breathing." The days turned darker still. On the first night of the new year, a farmstead on the outskirts was set ablaze. The family within barely escaped, and those who saw figures fleeing into the woods swore one of them limped badly, favoring his left leg. Eliza's blood ran cold. Nathaniel had been wounded at the river. The pieces fit too neatly to ignore. 2 nights later, she received her own proof. A package was left at Martha's door. Inside lay a scrap of cloth, stiff with dried blood. Pinned to it was a note in a hand she knew too well. "I will finish what I began." Her hands shook as she read it, the letters searing into her mind. "Martha, tried to take it from her, but Eliza clutched it tight. "This is not threat," she whispered. "It is promise." The militia doubled their guard, placing men outside Martha's house each night. Yet Eliza knew Nathaniel's strength was not in open assault, but in shadows, in striking where least expected. He would not come when they waited for him. He would come when she was alone, vulnerable, certain of her fear. The waiting gnawed at her, each night longer than the last. She began to mark her diary, not only with words, but with times and dates, recording each strange sound, each rumor, each whisper of danger. It became a map of dread, a chronicle of the shadow that loomed over her life. And then, one bitter night in February, the shadow returned in flesh. The militia had thinned their patrols, called to another search near Raven. Hollow, Martha slept deeply, exhausted by the day's work, and Samuel lay quietly in his cradle. Eliza sat by the fire, diary open in her lap, when she heard it, the soft groan of the floorboard by the window. Her blood froze. She turned her head slowly. Heart hammering, the shutters rattled. A figure pressed against the glass dot Nathaniel Cross. His face was gaunt, pale with the toll of injury and wilderness, but his eyes burned with the same cold fire she remembered. Scars ran down one side of his cheek, and his left arm hung stiff. But his presence was no less terrifying. Eliza gasped, clutching Samuel to her chest. Nathaniel's lips curved into a smile. It was more snarl than grin. He tapped the glass, once with his fingers, a slow, deliberate gesture, as if to say, "I am not gone. I will never be gone." Before she could scream, he vanished into the night. By the time militia arrived, summoned by her cries, there was no trace but footprints in the snow, leading back into the forest. The officers urged her to remain calm, insisting it could have been another man, a trick of fear. But Eliza knew. She had seen his eyes, his scarred face, his mocking smile. She wrote it all down that very night. Nathaniel lives. He came to my window. He has not forgotten. He will not forgive. If I vanish, it will be by his hand. From that moment, Boone's Crossing lived in the grip of terror. Every family barred their doors. Every traveler carried a musket. Children whispered of the river ghost, a man who could not be drowned. For Eliza, the terror was not rumor but certainty. Nathaniel Cross was alive, and his shadow had returned to claim what he believed was his. Yet even in her fear, a spark of resolve grew. She had survived him once. She had borne a child in the wilderness, carried truth through fire and blood. If he came again, she would not face him as a helpless girl, but as a mother, a witness, and a woman armed with words sharper than any blade. The shadow had returned, but so too had her will to defy it. Snow still clung to the hills outside Boone's Crossing, but the thaw had begun. Rivers swelled with meltwater, carrying broken branches and ice downstream, as if the land itself was purging the weight of winter. Yet for Eliza Wren, the thaw brought no relief. Nathaniel Cross had returned, and every shifting shadow seemed to carry his presence. Weeks had passed since she saw his scarred face at her window, but the memory remained carved into her mind. The militia scoured the forests, finding only traces, a bootprint here, a burned-out camp there. Each discovery proved what she already knew. Nathaniel had survived the river, and he was circling closer with each day. Her nights became endless vigils. She sat with Samuel cradled against her chest, listening for the groan of the floorboards, the scratch at the shutters, the whisper of a hand against the glass. Each sound made her heart pound. Her hand tightened around the small pistol Martha had pressed into her palm. "If he comes again," Martha had said firmly, "you must be ready to act." But how does one prepare to face the devil who once owned their soul? The answer came on a storm-laden night in March. Thunder cracked across the valley, and rain lashed against the roof of Martha's home. Eliza sat by the fire, diary open in her lap, when the door shuddered under a violent blow. She froze Samuel, stirring in his cradle. Another blow followed, harder, the wood splintering. The door gave way, and Nathaniel Cross stepped inside. He was a specter of his former self, gaunt, pale, his body marked by wounds and hardship, but the fire in his eyes burned with undiminished fury. Water dripped from his cloak, pooling on the floorboards, and in his hand gleamed the edge of a hunting knife. "Eliza," he rasped, his voice roughened by smoke and river water. "You thought the river would claim me, but I am not so easily broken." Eliza rose, clutching Samuel in one arm and the pistol in the other. Her body trembled, but her voice did not falter. "You should have stayed in the water, Nathaniel. That was the only grave deep enough for you." He laughed, though it sounded more like a snarl. "You betrayed me. You burned what I built. And now you speak lies to every fool who listen. But lies can be silenced." He took a step closer, the knife catching the firelight. "And you will learn what silence means." Martha burst into the room, rifle in hand, but Nathaniel lunged before she could fire. The weapon clattered to the floor as he struck her aside, his strength feral despite his wounds. Eliza screamed, backing toward the hearth, Samuel wailing in her arms. Cornered, she raised the pistol. Her hands shook violently, her breath ragged. Nathaniel sneered. "You think you can kill me? You, who once begged for mercy at my feet." Her grip tightened. "I am not that girl anymore." The pistol fired. The crack echoed through the small house, louder than the thunder outside. Nathaniel staggered, clutching his side, blood seeping through his fingers. Yet he did not fall. With a roar, he lunged again. Knife raised high. Eliza turned, shielding Samuel, bracing for the blow, but Martha, regaining her strength, swung the iron poker from the hearth with all her might. The weapon struck Nathaniel's skull with a sickening thud. His body crumpled to the floor, the knife slipping from his grasp. Silence followed, broken only by Samuel's cries and the storm outside. Eliza stood frozen, pistol still raised, staring at Nathaniel's body. His chest rose and fell shallowly, blood pooling around him. Martha touched her shoulder, her voice urgent. "It's done, child. He's finished." But Eliza shook her head. She stepped closer, looking down at the man who had haunted her every breath. His eyes fluttered open, defiant even in defeat. "You cannot bury me," he whispered. Eliza lowered the pistol, her face cold with resolve. "No, Nathaniel, you buried yourself." She fired once more, the final shot silencing him forever. The storm outside raged as the militia arrived, summoned by the gunfire. They found Nathaniel's body sprawled on the floor, Eliza standing over him with Samuel in her arms, her face pale but unbroken. The captain knelt, pressing fingers to Nathaniel's throat, then shook his head. "It's over," he declared. But Eliza knew better. It was not over, not truly. The scars he had left on her, on the town, on the countless families who had vanished, would never fade. His brotherhood, too, lingered like smoke in the trees, shadows that might never be fully extinguished. Still, his reign was ended. The river had failed to claim him, but justice had found him at last in the home of the woman he had tried to destroy. In the days that followed, Boone's Crossing gathered to bury him beyond the town, far from consecrated ground. No marker was placed, no prayer spoken. The earth swallowed him without ceremony, as if eager to erase his stain. Eliza stood at a distance, Samuel in her arms, the diary clutched in her free hand. She did not watch the soil fall. She did not need to. Her eyes were on the future, not the grave. Back in Martha's home, she opened her diary one last time. The pages were filled with names, dates, confessions, and truths too heavy for one woman to carry. She wrote her final entry with steady hand. Let this be the end of Nathaniel Cross, but not the end of his story. May those who read these words remember that monsters walk not only in shadows, but among us in plain sight. And may my son grow in a world where truth is spoken, no matter the cost. She closed the book and pressed it against her chest. Samuel stirred, his small hand curling around her finger, anchoring her to the life she had chosen to protect. Outside, the thaw continued. Snow melted, rivers surged, and the valley prepared for spring. The wilderness had witnessed death, fire, and betrayal, but it also held the promise of renewal. Eliza stepped to the window, watching the horizon lighten with dawn. She felt the weight of survival, of grief, of resilience. But she also felt something stronger, a quiet certainty that she had broken free. Nathaniel Cross was gone. His shadow might linger in memory, but it no longer ruled her. The last chapter of his reign had been written, and hers was only beginning.